morning, everyone. I hope you all are doing wonderful. Uh, this Sunday morning, it is Sunday, June 28th, and it is so wonderful to be here with you guys. And this morning, for our Sunday morning devotion, we are going to be continuing in Joshua. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 10. Verses 1 through 15. And our lesson today is called The Provision of Peace. Now, let me go ahead and bring up our PowerPoint. All right, almost there. All right, so in this session, we saw that the Israelites begin their campaign to conquer the promised land with a victory over the fortified cities of Jericho. And we saw God provide the victory. He spared Rahab, and bring her into the people of God. And in the following chapters, after that, the Israelites suffered defeat at the city of Ai because they failed to follow God's instruction. But they were given victory over that same city after they had repented. And in this session this morning, we'll see that Israel had learned an important lesson. Victory was theirs if they obeyed God, and defeat was certain if they relied upon themselves. Question to think about as we begin is, why do you think God would want us to learn the lesson that self-reliance ultimately leads to our defeat in the end? So be thinking about that throughout this lesson, okay? So Joshua chapter 10, verses 1 through 8, I'm going to go ahead and read that now. It says, "As soon as Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted to its destruction, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent Hoham, king of Hebron, to Piram, king of Jarmuth, to Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, and let us strike Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the people of Israel. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and encamped against Gibeon and made war against it. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you. All right. Oops. Took my place out of the Bible. Let me find that real quick. All right. So when the kings near Jericho and Ai, they heard about how these 2 cities had fallen, they formed an alliance to fight against the invading Israelites, all except the Gibeonites, who had taken a different approach. Because some of them had pretended that they journeyed from far away, and they convinced Joshua to sign a treaty of peace. Now, Joshua did fall for this ruse because he didn't contact and consult with God when the truth came out. When the truth came out, the Israelites had no choice but to honor the treaty. Okay, and because of the deception, Joshua, though, declared that the Gibeonites would be cursed and that they would become woodcutters and water carriers for the Israelites. So essentially kind of slaves, servants. It was civility, but not camaraderie. But so the other rulers, though, in the area were not happy that Gibeon, a large city with many warriors, had aligned themselves with Israel. Okay, so the Gibeonites, they aligned themselves with the Israelites, who was their enemy at the time. So the Amorite kings attacked Gibeon. Now Gibeon, it was powerful, but no match for this alliance between the other kings and the other kingdoms. So with nowhere else to turn, the Gibeonites sent word for help from Joshua. But would Joshua and the Israelites' army answer the call? Now, to ignore the Gibeonites' call for help would surely have been the easy thing to do. But Joshua and the Israelites, they didn't find an excuse to betray their word, right? Because the Gibeonites and them had a treaty, and they wanted to uphold that treaty. And they kept their oath, and they marched forward to defend a people who had tricked them. But they did make a promise. So question, what are some ways we tend to try to play it safe today, even if that path takes us away from God? I think, that can be a pretty hard answer, but I think an easy answer for that is, man, we like to play it safe all the time when we're uncomfortable, right? When there's a situation that we're uncomfortable, we'll play it safe, even if that means being away from God. So after the Israelites set out from Gilgal to help defend the Gibeonites, God spoke to Joshua. He instructed him not to be afraid. And so God was going to hand over the opposing alliance to the Israelites. And so what appeared to be a great risk from Israel, from a human perspective, was actually God's way of delivering 5 kings and their armies to Joshua and the Israelites all at the same time. So once again, though, we see God reminding Joshua that victory was based on who he is and what he would do, not on who the Israelites were and what they could do. So God put the Gibeonites in the path of the Israelites. And so God gave Joshua the opportunity to honor the word he had given the Gibeonites. God provided the battle that would reveal his power. So now before we read this next section, the situation came about from deception, right? None of it was outside of God's plan, though, to make good on his promise to give his people the land. So how is it comforting to know that God can be glorified and bring good from anything, even our mistakes? God is awesome. You know the song, "Our God is an awesome God," right? Our God is an awesome God, and he shows that even when we mess up, he will take that situation and turn it around. So verses 9 through 15. Okay, verses 9 through 15, it says, "So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all the night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth-horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth-horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. At that time Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, 'Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon.' And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jashar? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven, and did not hurry to set about for a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal." So the Israelite army, they drew near Gibeon, and they were tired, right? They had fought, or they had caught up with the alliance of the 5 kings, and it was a surprise. But this advantage they had was lessened by their weakened state from marching all night. But this is what God wanted. So once again, though, we see that God's strength is made known most clearly through the weakness of his people. Notice who acted in these verses. The Lord. The Lord was the one who threw the opposing army into confusion. And God had told Joshua that he would hand the enemy over to the Israelites. How have you seen and experienced God's power, and what have you learned from those experiences? So the battle had been won. God provided the victory, and the alliance of 5 nations, they were running. The day was getting late, though, but the Israelites, they were energized from this victory, but they were tired. And Joshua had something else other than calling off his troops advanced in mind. Now Joshua knew the battle was the Lord's and the victory was secured, but there was a problem. He needed more daylight for his forces to see the battle through to the end, because they would not be able to continue fighting in the dark. They didn't have electricity like we do today. And he did what was only logical. He prayed for God to hold the sun in its place and to stop the moon's advance. So God answered Joshua's prayer. The sun stood still. And just as Joshua demonstrated his faith in God, the army demonstrated their faith and obedience as they cast aside their tiredness, their exhaustion, possible frustration, and they kept fighting. When they likely wanted to stop, though, Joshua prayed for the ability to keep going. In the end, God won a greater victory and received greater glory. Now, perhaps Joshua's prayer brings to mind another prayer for strength in the midst of a different battle. So when a different warrior, full of exhaustion and agony, he would fight until the end as well after praying. A verse in the New Testament says, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." That's from Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. So similarly to Joshua, Jesus knew the Father was Lord of the battle. The Father would supply him with strength, and he would see Christ through to the victorious end. So to look at some reflection questions. What are some things the Israelites were reminded about in this account regarding God and his character? He is all-powerful, right? And why is it important that we approach sin within our lives in terms of a battle? Because we shouldn't want to give in to sin, right? Just like if you think of a war, you wouldn't want the other side to win. You want to win. And we know that sin is wrong, and we don't want to give in to sin. And so that's why, you can think of it as a battle. What are some important reminders that we need to recall as we face our own battles in life? That, these reminders are that if we trust in God, he will be there for us. He will give us the strength we need in victory or even in defeat. Let's go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer. God, I just thank you so much for this time this morning that you've given us to look into your word more in depth. And God, I pray that as we continue to slowly kind of get back into the world more and more, and businesses slowly reopen, I just pray that we can still use caution when it comes to our health and safety. But I ask that, and I pray that that we may have the strength, that you give us the strength so that we may spread your word throughout the world. And I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.